I have always been an avid fisherman, and on that Friday, we were ready for a new adventure. My name is Carlos, and along with my friends Marcos, Julio, and my sister Ana, we decided to explore the deep waters of Crescent Lake in Washington. The lake was famous among fishermen, but few ventured into its more remote areas, especially at night. That was precisely what attracted us. We arrived at the lake as the sun was setting. We set up camp in an isolated area, away from the weekend fishermen. The sun sank below the horizon, reflecting on the calm water's surface, and the silence was broken only by the sounds of birds and rustling trees. Marcos, always practical and skeptical, was concerned about the lack of cell phone signal. "If something goes wrong, we're on our own," he said, but I just laughed. The idea was to disconnect from the world and enjoy nature. Anna, my adventurous sister, was excited. "Finally, a real fishing trip," she said, while Julio, always nervous, checked the fishing rods and hooks. The night promised to be long and productive. As night fell, we cast our lines into the water. The sky was clear, filled with stars, and the full moon illuminated the landscape around us. Everything was going well until suddenly, a strange sound filled the forest, a distant noise, as if someone were walking among the trees. "Did you hear that?" I asked, but Marcos shook his head. "Probably an animal," he said, dismissing it. We tried to ignore it, but the sound persisted, getting closer. Aina, always brave, suggested we investigate. "It could be an injured animal," she said, but Julio was clearly scared. "I'd rather stay here," he murmured, and I couldn't help but feel a chill. We decided to stay together, and as the sounds continued, something glinted between the trees. It was a small wooden cabin, seemingly abandoned. It looked like a scene from a horror movie, but curiosity overcame fear, and we went to explore. The cabin was old, with rotting wooden boards and broken windows. The door was ajar, and it creaked ominously as we pushed it open. Inside, we found dusty furniture and a sense of abandonment that made our skin crawl. That's when Anna spotted a diary on a table. "Look at this," she said, blowing the dust off the cover. The diary belonged to a man named Joaquim, who seemed to have been a fisherman like us. We started reading his entries, and with each page our unease grew. Joaquim wrote about strange events that occurred while he was fishing on the lake, unexplained sounds, shadowy figures, and a growing fear of something in the dark waters. The last entry was the most disturbing. He mentioned feeling watched, and that something or someone was coming to get him. Upon returning to our camp, the sounds had stopped, but the sense of unease remained. We tried to fish, but the atmosphere was heavy. Marcos, still skeptical, tried to calm our nerves. "It's probably just stories to scare children," he said, but I could see in his eyes that he was nervous too. Then Julio, looking at the water, shouted. Something was moving beneath the boat. "What is that?" he asked, his voice trembling. The calm waters were now churning, and a shadow seemed to move beneath us. "Let's get out of here," Anna said. But before we could gather our things, the boat started rocking violently. It was as if something enormous were trying to flip the boat. Panic set in, and we began rowing frantically back to shore. Back on the relative safety of land, we tried to make sense of what had happened. That's when Anna, flipping through Joaquim's diary again, found a detail we had overlooked. Joaquim mentioned that every time something strange happened, he felt more drawn to the lake, as if something were trying to keep him there. "We're trapped here," Julio said softly. "We need to leave before it's too late." But the reality was that we couldn't leave until dawn. We were isolated with no communication and a growing sense that we were being watched. The night passed slowly, with every sound amplified by the darkness. When the sun finally began to rise, we quickly broke camp and prepared to leave. But as we loaded the boat, we noticed marks on the shore as if something large and heavy had been dragged out of the water. We managed to get away from the lake, but something changed within us. Joaquim's stories and the events of that night left an indelible mark. We never returned to Crescent Lake, and whenever I hear about disappearances in those waters, fear grips me immediately. I learned months later that the cabin had been demolished, and Joaquim's diary had mysteriously vanished. We never heard of him or his stories again. It became clear to us that something haunts those waters, something that repeats its cycle of terror and seeks new victims. That fishing trip, which was supposed to be a fun adventure, turned into a nightmare we will never forget. And whenever someone asks me about Crescent Lake, I simply warn them not to venture too far into its deep, dark waters, for there are things that even reason cannot explain. My name is Jack Thompson, and I am the captain of the fishing vessel Blue Wonder. For years, my crew and I sailed the Bering Sea, braving storms and treacherous waves in pursuit of the valuable king crab. On that fateful night, everything seemed routine. We had set off from Dutch Harbor with ample provisions, and my crew was ready for another season. The crew on that day consisted of Mike, Big Mike Harrison, my first mate, a large 45-year-old man with over 2 decades of sea experience; Tommy Tom Williams, our 30-year-old engineer who knew boat engines inside out; Eddie Ed Johnson, a young, eager 22-year-old deckhand, new to the crew but eager to prove his worth; Charlie Chuck Brown, a 50-year-old veteran fisherman known for his terrifying tales and superstitions. That night, a storm was brewing. The waves started to swell, and the wind howled, but it was nothing we hadn't faced before. We thought we were prepared. As the storm raged on, Eddie was on deck, adjusting the nets. Suddenly, I heard a scream. I rushed out to find that Eddie had vanished. The storm hindered visibility, but we knew something was amiss. Mike and I searched the deck, calling out Eddie's name, but he was nowhere to be found. Tom and Chuck joined the search, but all we discovered were strange footprints near the edge of the boat, unlike anything human. A chill ran down my spine. We tried to rationalize, thinking maybe Eddie had slipped, but those footprints, they made no sense. We decided to continue the search, despite the storm making it increasingly difficult. Hours passed with still no sign of Eddie. Suddenly, Tom shouted from the other side of the boat. We rushed over to find him standing still, staring at something on the deck. There, we saw deep claw marks as if something large and monstrous had scraped against the floor. Chuck, his eyes wide, began muttering about sea creature legends. I had never believed in such tales, but the evidence was right before us. Something inexplicable had happened to Eddie. The storm began to subside, but the fear in our hearts only intensified. We decided our best option was to return to port and report Eddie's disappearance. As we prepared to do so, the lights on the boat started flickering. Tom checked the generator, only to find it functioning perfectly. It was as if some malevolent presence was haunting us. Suddenly, a massive shadow passed beneath the boat, causing it to rock violently. We dashed into the cabin, locking all the doors. We could hear something scratching the hull, emitting a deep, guttural sound unlike anything I'd ever heard. Terror gripped us all. After an endless night, the storm finally abated. There was no sign of the creature, but we knew we had to get out of there. With the engines roaring, we navigated back to Dutch Harbor. Upon reaching the port, we began offloading and preparing to report Eddie's disappearance to the authorities. As we were doing so, we heard a strange noise coming from the ship's hold. We rushed to investigate and were astonished to find Eddie huddled in a corner, his eyes wide with fear. He was dirty, bruised, but alive. Eddie recounted a terrifying tale of being dragged away by some unknown entity and trapped in the hold. Unable to escape or call for help due to the deafening noise of the storm, he said he felt watched by something outside the boat. Something he couldn't see clearly, but knew was there. We reported the incident to the authorities, but there wasn't much they could do besides file a report. For us, who lived through that haunted night, we knew something sinister had occurred. After that, we never returned to the Bering Sea. The Blue Wonder was sold, and each of us went our separate ways. But the memory of that night remains etched in our minds. Years later, I still think about that night and those strange footprints. The sea holds many secrets, some of which perhaps are better left unknown. Deep sea fishing was never the same for me. And every night when I close my eyes, I see those marks and hear those sounds, reminding me that there are things in the ocean that mankind may never comprehend. My name is Ethan McAllister, captain and owner of the vessel North Wind, and I have sailed the icy waters off the coast of Nova Scotia for longer than I can remember. On that fateful night, the air was thick with a dense fog, and my crew was eager for a bountiful catch of codfish. Aboard with me were Liam Lee O'Connor, an experienced fisherman who often questioned the legends surrounding our trade; Aidan Aid Murphy, the eager novice keen on learning; and Declan Dex Fitzpatrick, a veteran who loved spinning chilling tales of the sea. During our fishing expedition, we spotted a small drifting vessel, and something about it caught our attention. A female figure stood at its prow, enveloped in the mist. She seemed to be waiting for us. We decided to draw closer to see if she needed assistance, but as we approached, a sense of unease crept over us. Upon rescuing the woman from the drifting vessel, the fog seemed to thicken, engulfing us in a palpable darkness. The radio began to crackle and fail, and our navigation instruments went haywire. Objects started moving on their own, and each of us began having disturbing visions of the woman now aboard with us. Declan muttered about ancient legends of the sea witch, a vengeful spirit haunting these waters, punishing those who disturb her eternal rest. However, Liam and Aid tried to rationalize, insisting it was all just an eerie coincidence. The truth revealed itself when the female figure transformed before our very eyes, unveiling herself as the vengeful spirit of the sea witch. Her eyes burned with supernatural fire as she uttered a curse upon us, vowing to drag us to the ocean's depths as punishment for disturbing her slumber. In a desperate moment, we tried to resist the curse, but it was like fighting against the tides themselves. The boat began to rock violently, the waves roaring around us. Declan recited ancient words of protection, while Liam and Aid struggled to maintain control of the vessel. I, desperate, pleaded with the heavens for mercy. Just when all seemed lost, a ray of light pierced the darkness, dispelling the dense fog. Before our astonished eyes, the figure of the sea witch dissipated, vanishing as if she had never been there. We were left trembling and exhausted. We returned to the port of Nova Scotia, our hearts heavy with what we had witnessed that night. We decided never to speak of what happened, fearing we might draw the sea witch's attention once more. But the memories of that night would haunt our dreams forever, reminding us of the ancient lessons of the sea, that we are not always in control of the forces that dwell within its depths. If you enjoyed the video you just watched, you won't want to miss this next one. Click now and I'll see you there.